Now you're listening to Fantastic Formosa with Joh Abrams in Taipei. Welcome back to Fantastic Formosa with Joh Abrams, and we're a returning guest, Ross Feingold, of the director, one of the many directors of Arrow. Just came back from Washington, D.C., and we had a great discussion last episode about the things that American expatriates have to deal with the federal government, and many of these things might seem boring to you unless you're an American expatriate. For example, bank issues, taxes, even an emergency evacuation. Some Americans get stuck here, don't they? Financial problems, and they have to go to their local embassies and ask for repatriation back to America.
Yeah, I don't think the United States is in the business of doing that for people overseas. I mean, there are some countries that do make emergency loans. Off the top of my head, I don't know if the U.S. would do that. But if they did do that, they would ask for an IOU.
Right.
They're not going to just buy you a plane ticket.
Now, an IOU is an interesting term in America. It means I owe you money.
Correct.
And it's often spelled like that, I with an O and U. And you put it on a napkin if you're in a pub and you've had 5 beers. Someone bought you 5 beers. And you're
speaking from experience, Sean.
Yeah, I owe you 5 beers. You know. And oftentimes it's a necessary way to treat people because you forget that you borrowed or they borrowed or whatever, and the people get annoyed by that. The IOU. So yeah, I do believe that Americans who are entrapped here, and I've met a few that. Financially, they find out that they are not making it here, and they go to local embassies in China or wherever, and they apply for financial assistance. And the local embassy or consulate takes your passport, I guess, or at least they take it when you arrive back in the United States, and they buy you a ticket, and they fly you back to wherever you want to go, and you don't get your passport back until you pay that money back. So you could definitely end up never flying anywhere.
Yeah, I don't recommend overseas Americans become vagabonds in the countries where they live.
Now, what is a vagabond? Do you know?
Somebody who lives on the streets.
Yeah.
Has no money.
Well, we see them oftentimes in the summer. They come to Asia. They want to teach English. They dress like a little bit like long hair, hippie type. They got backpacks, and they're just living in what we call hostels, right? And
not hostile.
Not hostile. No, but hostile. How do you pronounce it?
One is hostile. The other one's hostile.
Okay. And these are really just cheap.
Yeah. But to be fair to Taipei, John, there are actually a lot of new kind of co-living, co-working spaces, especially in the western part of Taipei. Right. A lot of old buildings have been repurposed as it's kind of dormitory-style rooms. Sometimes they also have the option to get your own room, but it also has co-working spaces as well. And this is for the digital nomad traveler.
Right. Yeah, they're very nice. I've been in some of these.
What are you doing in the hostel?
Well, I have, I've met the folks coming here studying Chinese, for example, from the United States, and they've
invited you to their hostel.
Well, no, they got to drop off their backpack, or they got and it's usually over in the Shida area, or and I go, my God, I never had anything like this when I was here. My place was quite literally a hole in a wall. It's kind of scary. People live there.
Yeah,
and
I had the same experience the first time I came to Taipei.
And I was I did my best to stay away from everybody. I got my own room, hopefully those people are not around anymore. the whole issue regarding what Taiwan wants from Congress in the United States, coming up with, this summer is a crazy time. We got protests on U.S. campuses. We have the Democratic Convention coming up.
But first, the Republican Convention
where is
in mid-July.
Mid-July. Now, where is that?
That's in Milwaukee,
Wisconsin.
Now,
Now, that's a beer capital.
famous for beer and some other things.
Yeah.
And then the Democrat Convention will be about a month later in mid-August, and that's being held in Chicago.
Now, we think that might be violent a little bit. There's a lot of talk that it might be.
I don't know it'll be violent, but there'll certainly be some enthusiastic protesters. But I think that there's the potential for enthusiastic protesters to congregate at the Republican convention as well. There are plenty of Americans who don't like Donald Trump, so they're going to be protesting Donald Trump being officially made the nominee of the Republican Party. And then at the Democrat convention a month later, there are going to be people who are upset with Joe Biden over any number of different issues, so they'll be protesting there.
I think the difference between the two protesting groups is that the ones protesting Donald Trump are mostly from the left, and the ones protesting at the Democratic convention will be from the left.
Yes, they also will be from the left. Yeah, for some people on the left, Biden is insufficiently on the left to them. They think he's a bit of a sellout. He's too moderate, or he's too willing to work with commercial interests, for example. My own opinion is that Biden has been fairly left, or even too far left, during his time as president. That's why the polls show he's potentially going to lose some of the swing states, because I think some of the voters in the swing states feel that Biden is too far to the left. But obviously, like I said, there are going to be plenty of protesters who think Biden is insufficiently to the left.
So what is a swing state?
Well, it's a state that you can't predict for sure which presidential candidate the majority of voters will vote for. So, for example, New York State is not a swing state because of the large population in New York City. New York State's vote is always going to favor the Democrat candidate. So Joe Biden will definitely win New York's electoral votes this year. Same thing with California, because of the large population of Los Angeles and San Francisco, very liberal areas. California's electoral votes will definitely go for the Democratic candidate. Then you have plenty of states in the South or the Midwest or the upper Midwest, a state like Alabama or Mississippi, where the electoral vote will definitely go to the Republican candidate. There's no dispute. There's no potential for Alabama or Mississippi or Wyoming or North or South Dakota. There's no potential for those states' electoral votes to go to the Democrat. It'll absolutely go to the Republican. And then there's about 7 or so states that every cycle, every election, we can't predict for sure which way it will go. They swing back and forth. They swing between the Republican and the Democrat. And the swing states are Pennsylvania is a significant one, Michigan, Wisconsin, Virginia, North Carolina, Arizona, and Nevada. Those are, I just named 7 swing states.
So those are the states, what we call battleground.
Yeah, swing state or battleground states. And that's where the election will be decided. The election's not going to be decided in New York. It's not going to be decided in Florida, because Florida now looks like it will vote again for the Republican. Texas, same thing. It looks certain to vote Republican. I'll tell you, though, about Florida and Texas, there's always speculation that this is the time that Democrats will do better in Texas or Florida, and then it doesn't happen. And we see, even in recent days, there's more talk about that at Florida. There's potential. Maybe Biden is not that far behind Trump in Florida or Texas. That might be hope, the triumph of hope over experience. So if you were somebody who wagers, it's probably safer to wager on Donald Trump winning Florida and Texas rather than Joe Biden. So the election's going to be decided in those 7 swing states.
Many people watch on TV, YouTube, or whatever. These are political pundits, people that talk about politics a lot, and refer to this as the election like no other.
There's probably people who say that in every election, just like there's always somebody who says, this is the most important election in your lifetime, right? Every election, somebody says that. And you know what's another thing that somebody says in every election cycle, John? There's always somebody who says, if fill in the blank, one of the candidates, if he wins, I'm going to move abroad.
Yes.
Right. There's always people who say that because they don't like the other side. It's right. They really dislike the candidate from the other side. And they always, every cycle, there's always somebody who says, if so-and-so wins, I'm going to move abroad.
Move
of course,
to Canada.
We can't say that because we already live abroad. Yeah.
But we didn't. I don't think we moved over here for political reasons.
I certainly did not.
No, I did not. But I think that all goes back to the Vietnam War, when people were moving to Canada or France or someplace like that.
To avoid the draft.
If Nixon won was a big deal. I can remember as a kid, I'm going to move to Paris. And some did. Couldn't come back.
I thought I thought there was an amnesty.
There was an amnesty.
President Carter.
Yeah, President Carter gave an amnesty to all the draft dodgers, we call them, that ran to Canada to avoid prosecution or going to Vietnam. I thought it was an over-dramatic step on the part of people running to Canada because they could just have easily joined the Air Force or Navy and ended up sweeping floors or driving a truck or.
Well, actually, from the organization that I'm on the board of directors, the Association of Americans Resident Overseas, we know that one of the two places with the largest populations of overseas Americans are Canada and Mexico. So a lot of people don't move far away. They don't move to Taiwan. They move to neighboring countries for a variety of reasons. Mexico's become very popular as a place to retire to because the cost of living is far less. So a lot of American expatriates now living in Mexico, despite in the United States or globally, we often see negative news about Mexico with regard to public safety.
Right.
There's a lot of violence related to drug trafficking. There people get kidnapped, held for ransom, et cetera, et cetera. But a very large and increasing number of Americans are moving to Mexico. Also, another advantage of retiring to Mexico is it's not as far away as if you move to, say, Costa Rica, which historically has been a popular place for Americans to retire to as well, or some of the other Central American countries
Belize,
like Belize, for example. And Belize is attractive as a retirement destination because the main language is English rather than Spanish.
Right. Yeah, and I guess the British retire in places like Spain and other European areas. My concern about moving to Belize or Mexico would be, as you get older, having someone to watch over you. It's too trusting the locals, I suppose. But I don't know. Florida is a very common destination for retirees in New York, right?
Yes, it is, but the cost of living, of course, is increasing.
Is getting worse.
Yeah.
Yes. For Taiwan to get anything done this year is probably in the U.S. Congress is unlikely.
Well, everybody loves Taiwan in the U.S. Congress.
Really?
Right. There's nobody, with the exception of one or two libertarian members of Congress who, just as a rule, don't support U.S. involvement in overseas conflicts. And we know there's a couple of there's one member of the House and Massey from Kentucky, and then there's one member of the Senate, Paul from Kentucky, Rand Paul. Those are two people who generally oppose U.S. entanglements overseas. But other than that, Taiwan has almost universal support in Congress with its, given the potential invasion from China. And obviously, China is not very popular at the moment in the U.S. Congress.
Okay.
So broad support for Taiwan. The House and the Senate are working already on their National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. This is the bills to fund the U.S. military. The House is moving quickly. The Senate is a little bit slower. But as these bills have every year, there will be some Taiwan-friendly provisions in these bills, and the president usually signs them. He doesn't usually veto the defense spending bill. And there's always stuff in there like the U.S. Defense Department should do a study about how it could better assist Taiwan's defensive needs. So there'll definitely be stuff like that in the final version of the Defense Authorization Act.
So, so there shouldn't be too much frustration or concern for whichever president wins or potential candidate wins the White House.
Well, that's I would say that's a more complex issue. Both President Trump's administration and President Biden's administration have been supportive of Taiwan in a number of ways and in a number of different ways. But would one be more willing to do stuff for Taiwan than the other? I think the answer to that question is yes. And if we list out 20 things the Trump administration did for Taiwan and 20 things the Biden administration did for Taiwan, I think we would realize that actually there's probably going to be a few more things that the Trump administration does for Taiwan than maybe the Biden administration would be willing to do, whether that's the visit of cabinet secretaries, which the Trump administration did and the Biden administration has not done, or the types of weapon systems. The Biden administration has sold a number of weapons systems to Taiwan, but there hasn't been the big splash kind of sale like the Trump administration agreeing to sell tanks as well as F-16s.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, a slightly different approach to Taiwan from both administrations. But everyone is in love with Taiwan.
I think that's fair to say on Capitol Hill. And I was giving out, during this visit, I was giving out a business card that had my Chinese name and had set them in Taiwan, and people are like, "Ooh, you're in Taiwan. I was just there." So a lot of congressional staff visit Taiwan. So it was definitely, I would say, Congress is definitely a place with overwhelming support for Taiwan.
Yeah, it seems like this past 2 years have been a lot of congressional delegations here, tripping over themselves, as you say, might say. Do you think there are too many delegations, that they're not soaking up enough data on Taiwan to get an accurate assessment?
Well, my concern, having observed these trips for about 25 years, and you might know this as well, John, is they come and they get the tour that everything is okay.
Okay.
Right. They get a lot of positive news when they come here. They don't get necessarily straightforward news. And someone like me, John, I'm a very frank person, and I try to tell it like it is.
Sure.
Especially when I'm on your show, John. I always tell it like it is. But my concern is sometimes these visitors from the United States, they don't encounter people who tell them like it is with regard to various issues, including the state of defense preparation here in Taiwan. So that would be my concern with some of these visits.
That's a very common thing. These trips don't they have a special name?
That's top secret. Can't tell the audience.
No. What's the nickname for these trips?
Well, they typically call them CODELs, congressional delegations.
Yeah, congressional delegation trips. And they have it actually in their budgets, don't they? Some X number get to visit these.
Yeah, or sometimes the Taiwan government pays.
Oh, does it?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And how long do these trips normally last?
Typically a week, but half of those days are the flying days, so they might only be in Taiwan for, say, 4 nights at most.
Do they normally hit more than one area?
Yeah, normally they do get to different parts of Taiwan. They might get to the scenic areas like Sun Moon Lake. They might go visit the offshore islands like Penghu, Jinmen, or Matsu.
Good. I'm glad that they're able to get out of the main city and see the country itself.
Yeah, I think it would have been a real fruitful visit if they could have been in Penghu and seen, a Chinese submarine, which was in the news recently.
Yes. That was quite shocking. The waters are not deep there either. So
I guess that's why the submarine had to show itself.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, it was what we call in the U.S. Navy a boomer. That means it's a missile submarine. I don't always know if these are accidents or not, but having lived in near a submarine base in the United States, Norfolk, and dealing with guys who work in submarines, you never know. They tell you strange stories about accidents you should never hear about. So, an emergency going to the surface deal.
But to take the conversation back to my trip to Washington,
sure, please.
One thing that's pretty clear, given that we're now in the summer prior to Election Day,
right.
In the next few months, Congress is not going to do anything. Right? Everybody is preparing for first the Republican convention, and that'll be followed by the Democrat convention, and then Election Day in November. So no one expects any significant legislation to pass in the next few months other than the minimum stuff that Congress has to do, like budgets for the military, as we were talking about, and budgets for the other parts, and budgets for the other part of the federal government. And even that could be very contentious, as it was last year. But legislation in other areas, like tax policy, for example, I mean, that's really unlikely this year. So the Republicans that we spoke to, they're optimistic. They're optimistic that next year, just like in 2017, there will be a Republican-controlled House, there'll be a Republican-controlled Senate, and there'll be a Republican-controlled White House. Democrats, they also have some optimism that they might win the presidency again, but they should win at least one or maybe both of the houses of Congress. So the Democrats and Republicans are looking at this election through very different views, and each side thinks it's going to do well.
There has been comments in the U.S. media about a slight panic amongst the Democratic Party regarding Biden, his age, his forgetfulness, fears that he may not do well in a debate with Trump coming up, right?
Well, as President Trump likes to say very often, we'll see what happens. So, as one of his favorite things to say. So we'll see what happens at the upcoming debate at the end of June. It's interesting how the two candidates approach this. From media reports, Biden is doing a lot of preparation, briefings with his staff, doing mock debates where one of his aides will play the part of Donald Trump.
With the wig and everything.
Yeah, and try and prepare President Biden for the debate. Now, former President Trump has a different approach. He doesn't like to have hours of lectures with his staff about what to discuss or what to talk about. He might not even do a mock debate. Trump feels his best approach is to be spontaneous and not to be prepackaged.
Sure.
And I think by now we know that Trump feels very strongly about that. Being prepackaged, going on TV or into a debate and repeating a bunch of things that were prepared beforehand for him. He doesn't come across with the same energy when he repeats some talking points that have been prepared for him to say.
Sure.
He really does a more forceful, should we say, performance.
Right.
He does a more forceful performance when he's spontaneous.
He's always been that way.
Well, he's been in the media for 40 plus years.
He's been,
when I was growing up in the 80s in New York, he was a media personality. He was always very comfortable talking spontaneously to reporters or being a guest on television shows. In the 90s, he used to be on cable, when cable was becoming much more important as a venue for talk. He was periodically a guest on CNN or other networks, and he was doing that completely unprepared. And he's just a natural at it. We have to be fair to Trump. He's a natural at spontaneously doing interviews or standing up on stage giving a speech or having a debate. Last time, 4 years ago, he didn't really do much preparation. 8 years ago, when he had the debates with the other Republican candidates, he didn't do much preparation, and he was excellent at vanquishing his opponents, at making his opponents in the Republican primary in 2015, 2016. He was excellent at making them look bad. He would tell jokes or say sarcastic things that made the other candidates look bad. When he said, Marco Rubio has small hands, or
very strange.
Or when
comments.
He said Jeb Bush is low energy, these were winning talking points, and it came across like he said it spontaneously, very naturally, and made him the winner of the Republican primary 8 years ago. Then 4 years ago, like I said, he didn't really debate. He didn't really prepare for the debates with Joe Biden. Now, a lot of people felt that President Trump 4 years ago didn't do so well in the first debate. He came across as a bit too aggressive. He interrupted Joe Biden too many times. He did a little bit better in the subsequent debate. So the interesting thing about the first debate this year, the one at the end of June, is the organization running the debate, which is CNN, cable television news network. They're going to turn off the microphone of the person who it's not their turn to speak. They will turn on the microphone of the person whose turn it is to speak, and they will turn off the microphone of the other person. And that's because there's concern that Donald Trump is going to interrupt Joe Biden.
Yeah. Why is CNN sponsoring these debates?
Well, they're just one time. They just have this one debate
on
CNN, and then maybe a few months later there'll be the second debate. I don't recall offhand who's going to sponsor that or which TV network it'll be on. CNN, of course, is much more friendly to Joe Biden, but the two hosts, Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, are two of the political personalities. They talk about politics every day on CNN, and I guess the Trump people felt that this was worth the risk, that the hosts might be a bit biased towards Joe Biden.
CNN seems to have lost so much money over the past 10 years. It's not necessarily the high-performing network, yet it's still able to get that kind of leverage.
Yep. They still play an important role, even though you say the viewership of Fox, for example, is so much higher than CNN. Although, if you combine the viewership of CNN and MSNBC, which is also more favorable to the Democrats, if you combine MSNBC and CNN, then you're not that far behind Fox. It just shows how America is kind of divided down the middle. Half of America is partial, or nearly half is partial towards Trump, and nearly half is partial towards Biden, and then there's a smaller number of people in the middle.
Would there be a comparison between Fox and who else? Who would be the second conservative network in the U.S.?
Newsmax.
Newsmax. Okay, I do occasionally watch Newsmax. Just to see what it is exactly.
Well, my parents, they watch Newsmax to hear what the other side is saying. So my parents actually, they call it crazy TV. So let's turn on crazy TV and see what they're saying about Biden. My parents support Biden, and they're lifelong Democrats. So they find the conversation on the networks that support Trump. They find the conversation to be somewhat peculiar. That's why they call it crazy TV.
I totally agree. I've never seen anything like it. When I was there full time, I don't know how it became so emotional and less objective. Has there been a change in American culture that is?
Well, another interesting thing to keep in mind is if you look at a map of how people voted in 2020 across the entire United States, and you color in the map by counties at the county level, what you'll see is most of the United States, especially rural parts, from Maine all the way to California, in the counties, outside the big cities, most people voted for Donald Trump. And then you only see that there's some islands, I don't mean literal islands, I mean figuratively, islands of places that voted for Joe Biden, and that tends to be the big cities. So if you look at a map of the United States, you're going to see that there's Biden support in New York and Detroit, Philadelphia, Chicago,
right.
Miami, Los Angeles, San Francisco. So the support for the Democrats and Joe Biden is mostly confined to the big cities where they could run it up, because the populations of the cities are big, and the population in a lot of our big cities in America leans Democrat. So that's why when Joe Biden says he won by 7 million votes last time, well, yeah, but that's because there were like 2 million more votes in New York for Biden and 2 million more votes in California for Biden, or whatever the numbers were. It's just he runs up the score in the big cities. But again, if you look at a map of how people voted. You're going to see red all the way from Maine to California, red being the color for the Republicans, and you're going to see blue, the color for the Democrats, only in a few big cities.
That explains Illinois, because Illinois is next door to my home state, Indiana, and Indiana is Republican, but Illinois is Democrat based solely on Chicago.
Based solely on the large population in
Chicago.
Farming. And then you go into the rural areas, and it's solidly Republican. So what I always tell people when I share the map with them and explain this is, and for your listeners, John, here in Taiwan, important for them to keep in mind, if they are going to the United States for studies or leisure travel, if they are outside of the big cities, if they're driving across the United States or they're going to a university in a rural part of the United States, somewhere in the middle, like Oklahoma or Nebraska, for example, they're not in a big city. They have to remember that the people around them, if they go to a restaurant, for example, the people around them probably support Donald Trump. It's a far higher likelihood if you're in rural America, anywhere in rural America, in New York, once you're outside of New York City, or as you said, in Illinois, once you're outside of Chicago, or Texas, once you're outside of Dallas, wherever you are in rural America, which is most of America, people around you probably supported Trump, and you need to be very careful what you said. Your safest thing, if you're in the middle of a rural part of Oklahoma or Nebraska or Kansas or Missouri, really the safest thing to say is I supported Donald Trump, even though I'm not, if you're a person from Taiwan and you're not an American, the safest thing to say is I love Donald Trump, and if I was American, I'd vote for Trump, and the people around you in a restaurant, they're going to be cheering you.
Or to simply say you don't speak English.
Well, then how would you order food if you're in a restaurant? If you're in a diner at the
highway. Do what I do. Point at whatever it is, a picture. Yeah. I think, in my lifespan, from the 1960s on, I do find this election the most disruptive and divisive and strange.
We have a phrase in English. It's politics makes for strange bedfellows, which means that sometimes coalitions form that might seem very odd, and that's just part of the political process in a democratic country.
Right.
And John, we wouldn't have it any other way. People like to criticize the aspects of United States society, especially nowadays, because it's become so hyper partisan. Democrats just strongly dislike Republicans, and Republicans strongly dislike Democrats, and we see that in Congress. There's so much partisanship and dysfunction in Congress, or at the state level, where Republican governors and Democratic members of state legislatures, for example, they can't get along. But we wouldn't have it any other way. It's it's democracy, and that's the best system until somebody comes up with something better.
Right. Okay. Well, of course, I agree totally with that. But I think that something changed with the advent of the internet and social media and everyone having camera phones, the ability to basically record and document everything, and to what we call cancel culture in America, I suppose. And it seemed to be more personal in politics than it used to be.
Yeah, definitely. If you're having even more informal kinds of situations, if you don't say something that the moderator or the person leading the conversation wants to hear, they're going to throw you out.
Yes.
That is something that unfortunately a lot of people have had experience with. You lose friends, or you argue with family members because you don't say what they want to hear. And so, in the United States, we really do have this hyper-partisanship. And we have that here in Taiwan as well. The best example of that is the fighting, literal fighting, not figurative fighting, literal fighting in Taiwan's parliament, the legislative yuan.
Yeah. But I haven't seen this kind of divisiveness in America since Vietnam. I mean, at every level. It's just incredible. In Vietnam, sure, there were people who claimed that you were anti-patriotic if you didn't support our boys in Vietnam, and then there were those who said that I'm not going. I'm going to go to college, and I'm going to get 3 master's degrees to avoid going. You could get a college deferment. You didn't have to go if you were in college, and people basically went to school for life. We called them,
Yeah, when I was in university in the 90s, I had professors like that.
Yeah.
That they were of the age where they could have been eligible to be sent to Vietnam, but they stayed in school and they became professors.
Yeah, yeah. So they ended up with no what we call real world experience, never worked, and ended up in the academic
Environment.
and created another generation of problems, I suppose. I don't know. There seems to also be in America an anti-blue collar or anti-middle class segment of, I guess, the what we call the elite in Washington. Is this true? Did you find
typically, that? Typically, both Republicans and Democrats, they form part of their message with the middle class in mind, and they say the middle class have been left behind because they're not wealthy. They're not the high net worth wealthy people. It's a terrible thing to say, but appealing for the support of the less fortunate, it's not going to result in any donations.
Right.
So the candidates, they like to talk about small dollar donors. That's kind of typically like middle class people who might send in $50 or $100.
Right.
And because the candidates, whether Trump or Biden, it's not a good talking point to say, I just got hundreds of thousands of dollars from some rich person, right? People are going to think you're very elitist. So what they like to emphasize is how many small dollar donors they have. Again, people who might give $50 or $100. Those are middle class folks. And that's why a lot of the appeal that the Democratic or the Republican candidate will make is to say, I'm going to save the middle class. My policies are meant to help the middle class.
Trump seems to, even though he's a multimillionaire for most of his life.
He says he's a billionaire.
Yeah, you would think that he would not be appealing to the middle class, but they love him.
Well, he says, I'm fighting for you. And as you said, there's a certain segment of America that loves him. But also keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier, vast parts of the United States are conservative, and they would vote for the Republican candidate no matter who it is.
Right.
Regardless of who's the Republican candidate, most of America is going to vote for that, or in most areas of America, they're going to vote for the Republican because most areas of America, rural America, is conservative by nature.
But there was something unique about Trump in the first place when he first got elected. He was not a career politician by any means.
Well, that was definitely part of his appeal. Also, the aura of being a successful businessman was part of his appeal as well. He's going to run the government like it's a business. We always hear that every time somebody who's been a business person shifts into politics and attempts to win elective office. Right? There's always this hope that they could run the government like it's a business. Doesn't always work out that way. There's government bureaucracy, which
sure.
Some people will call it the deep state. Whoa, the deep state. I think some people overestimate the deep state, but
they're working against you. They know where you live.
The realities of lawmaking and the legislative process, as well as bureaucracies, mean you typically cannot run the government, whether it's state government or federal government. You can't run it like it's a business. You have to work within the structures that government exists under.
Right. Well, New York governor, was it? Ran for president, right? What was his?
Not this time.
No, last time, right?
No. New York governor hasn't run for president recently.
I'm trying to think of who it was from New York that ran. Rich, powerful.
Oh, you're thinking of Bloomberg.
Bloomberg, so sorry.
He briefly ran in 2020. I apologize, but his campaign kind of fizzled out quickly.
Yeah, he tried to eat pizza like a regular person.
Yeah, it doesn't work for some people. The famous situation like that people often refer to is in the 1988 election when the Democrat candidate Mike Dukakis went to a military base and he put a tank helmet on his head and stood in a tank, and he just looked very foolish.
He just looked completely out of his element.
Yeah. So
looked like a cartoon character.
Candidates and politicians now, they tend to avoid those kinds of situations.
I'll never forget that video of him in a M1 Abrams tank bouncing around with this huge. He looked like a Charlie Brown character. I'm surprised you remember that.
It's a defining moment of what politicians should not do.
Right.
And when you mentioned the pizza, yeah. So somebody who never eats at a small pizza parlor trying to eat a piece of pizza, they just look out of place, just like Dukakis looked out of place.
Right. Yeah. Is there such a thing as the elite in Washington?
It depends on your perspective. Some people think the deep state is the elite because they're really running government no matter what the president wants to do.
Right.
Then you also have members of the bureaucracy who've been in their jobs for decades.
Right.
You also have politicians who've been in their jobs for many decades. 10 years is nothing to be a member of the Senate or the House of Representatives. I mean, there are representatives and senators who've literally been in the job 40 years or more.
Right.
Some states, you always hear around election time that in some states there's a movement to have term limits for senators or representatives, and it never passes.
Right.
It's so difficult to amend state constitutions. So, and then there'd be questions about whether or not it's constitutional under the U.S. Constitution to limit the number of terms for federal offices. So you want to amend the state constitution, but then you're talking about a federal office.
Right.
So it becomes a very difficult issue. But at the moment, there are no term limits on representatives or senators, so they could stay in that job for their lifetime if they keep getting reelected. And we've had members of the House or the Senate who died in office, right? They stayed in office until their 90s.
There was one in California recently.
Yeah,
right?
Dianne Feinstein, senator from California.
She died.
She was like
in
92.
office.
91 or 92. She died in office.
She voted and she couldn't barely raise her head. I remember.
She was certainly looking her age, and I know that sounds like a mean thing to say, but ideally she would have retired years before.
How old was she? Do you
91
remember?
or 92, I think.
Oh my God! Don't you think some sort of age limit should be?
Well, as I said, though, it's extremely difficult.
80 at least.
It's extremely difficult to legislate that.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, it's like, who's older, Trump or Biden?
Biden's older by around 4 years.
So, Trump could look like that in 4 years, I suppose.
As we call it in English, father time.
Yes.
Will catch up with everyone at some
Right.
point, including Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He's Donald Trump, for somebody who's frankly overweight and doesn't exercise and likes to eat junk food.
That's right. He does.
He has amazing vigor and has avoided serious health problems. He's just very fortunate.
He is quite amazing. He was ordering McDonald's in the White House when he was at 2 o'clock in the morning.
He's very fortunate.
I think he's quite a character. And hopefully he's not the devil incarnate as so many people in the Democratic Party.
Well, again, as Trump likes to say, we'll see what happens if he wins a second term.
And with that, I bid you good evening and goodbye and good night, and thanks for coming back.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. Bye-bye.